sharks in Canada. Particularly, I look at the management status of these sharks and how they're managed in Canada, so what kind of policy and fishery regulation they have to protect those sharks.
All right. Canada faces some unique challenges in shark conservation in that you have sharks on coasts that border 3 different oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. What sort of species of shark does frequent Canadian waters?
Yeah, Canada is not well known to have a rich species of sharks, but we do have a couple. We have about 20 species on the Atlantic coast, 14 species on the Pacific coast, and 1 species in the Arctic, which is endemic to those Arctic and subarctic region, which is the Greenland sharks. And some species are found on both coasts, such as the blue sharks, such as the honey sharks, that is the most common, and the little smaller sharks that is found in bottom dwell.
All right. Explain to me what the Species at Risk Act is. That's similar to the Environmental or the Endangered Species Act in the United States. How does SARA work?
Yeah, sure. It was developed in 2002 to protect threatened species in Canada and their habitats. So basically how it works is that species has to be first evaluated by CIWIC, which is the Committee of Status to Threatened Species in Canada, and they first evaluate that, and then after the government evaluate the socio-economic impact of listing the species, legally listing the species under SARA. And once this is done, then the minister has the final decision to decide if the species will be added.
All right. What is Canada doing well in terms of shark conservation management policy?
We're doing pretty well on the Atlantic coast. We have management plan in place for our pelagic sharks. So we have quotas established, a limited amount of license, and defined seasoned. And so we're managing the blue sharks, short-fin mako, as well as the poor beagle shark.
Okay. And you mentioned in your talk that you have good monitoring and 100% dockside coverage. What is that? What does that mean?
Well, fishermen, once if they catch sharks, then they have to call before they're landing any product of sharks, and then so the government, the fishery department can monitor 100% of those landings of sharks.
And how does that compare to other nations where shark fishing takes place?
Well, in some regions there's no monitoring at all at the dockside, so there's no idea, people have no idea what's the species and the amount. So it's just reinforcing the monitoring program in Canada. We also have the regular logbook where fishermen have to hand in exactly, all the catches that any sharks that they're catching, they have to write down what's the species and check.
All right. What are some challenges facing Canadian shark conservation policy? How can they be improved?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenge is the problem with bycatch, and particularly the discards mortality, so the amount of sharks that are actually thrown back in the sea dead. It's a problem that is it's worldwide, and particularly in Canada, for example, the blue sharks is the most common bycatch species in our pelagic longlines, and they account for about 36% of the total weight of that fishery. And there's about 1,000 sharks every year, 1,000 metric tons of sharks every year that dies in our fisheries, and it's not accounted for in the management.
Okay. And you also mentioned during your talk that there are currently no prohibited species of sharks?
No, unfortunately there is no prohibited species. That means even species that are threatened by IUCN, so they have a conservation status, IUCN conservation status of endangered or threatened, they're not prohibited of landing in Canada. However, fortunately, a lot of them are really rare, so we rarely encounter them in our fisheries. But we have limitation and restriction for vulnerable species such as the poor beagle shark. And that's what it is.
All right. Can you explain the 5% rule?
Right, yes. Our finning policy right now is the most widely used finning policy. And so it's the 5% fin to weight carcass ratio. So how does it work is that fishermen cannot fin a shark, which is really the act of slicing the fin and throwing back the body back in the water. They have to land both the carcasses and the fins, and the way it is enforced at the dockside is by measuring, quantifying how much the weight of the fin were compared to the carcasses.
Okay. And is that a good policy? You said it's very widely used.
It is widely used. It's not the best in terms of shark conservation. question because there's a lot of loophole with this policy because it depends. The weight of the fins varies between species. It varies between also the state of the fins. If the fin is dry or if it's weight, and it varies with the depending of the weight also of the carcasses. So if you're looking at a dress carcasses or a whole carcasses, so dress carcasses would be completely remove all the intestine and everything. So it varies a lot, and there's chance that fishermen can land more fins versus the amount of carcasses.
What is a better alternative in terms of finning policy?
The better alternative is, and that has been called multiple times by the IUCN, for example, or any other conservation group, is to have shark fin naturally attached to the body of so you land a whole shark complete.
Okay. If you could change one thing about Canadian shark conservation management policy, what would that be?
It would certainly be to have some sort of quota limitation for bycatch species, the most common species, such as blue sharks and spiny dogfish.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your own research or about sharks in Canada or fisheries management policy in Canada?
There's a lot to do, and I think sharks is one way. Sharks is one example of fisheries that we're not looking at the whole ecosystem, the impact of fisheries on the whole ecosystem, such as the bycatch problems. And this is not just pertaining to sharks, but really to a lot of species. And this is something that I would like to pursue further in my PhD that I'll start in September on bycatch.